St. Matthew Lutheran Church in Dubuque, Iowa was established in 1907, thus marking its centennial anniversary in 2007. 100 years of worship, 100 years of teaching and preaching, of education and fellowship, marriage services, baptisms, and affirmation of baptism. Though the faces have changed in the pews and in the pulpit, there has been one constant throughout the century. St. Matthew Lutheran Church has been a place where people have come to worship their Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. The story behind the church is one that has never been told before in this way. Now, for the first time, we will step back and look at the very beginnings of St. Matthew, the changes the church has faced through the 10 decades, and the hope for its future in downtown Dubuque. Together we will examine the story of St. Matthew Church as we look back, look forward, look up. The story of St. Matthew Lutheran Church begins with the story of Reverend Henry Lutz. Born in Germany in 1840, Reverend Lutz became pastor of St. John's Lutheran Church in Dubuque when he was 32 years old. He was a man of strong persuasive powers, but could also be a tyrant, according to family legend. Reverend Lutz's missionary zeal and keen sense of business led many local projects. He was instrumental in relocating Wartburg Seminary to Dubuque. He oversaw the construction of St. Peter Church on Lincoln Avenue and Holy Trinity Church on Grandview Avenue, as well as the building of a new St. John's Church along with a school and parsonage. His horse Mabel and his buggy were a familiar sight along the streets of the city.
I remember Pastor Lutz, he used to come to the grocery store, my folks, and get groceries. Of course, nobody had cars, didn't know what cars were like. I remember he was a very, very nice man. His wife was pretty heavy set, but I can't place her too good now in my mind. We as kids would run in and tell our mom and dad, we'd tell that, here comes Pastor Lutz with the buggy and Mabel.
Under the seat of the buggy, he often carried a supply of alpine herbs, which was a popular remedy for various ailments. He served St. John's continuously as pastor for nearly 35 years until disharmony arose. It began in 1902 when some members of the congregation began to criticize Reverend Lutz for spending too much time on private interests that included real estate and the building of a fair patent medical practice that sold various medical remedies. According to an April 5, 1907 article in the Telegraph Herald, members of the congregation were treated by the minister, and his big sales prompted the Dubuque Medical Society to adopt a resolution censuring his activity. The congregation charged that due to these interests, Reverend Lutz was neglecting to give all attention to the spiritual guidance and instruction of his flock, and that his sermons had fallen off considerably in merit and were not up to the standard that he had set years before. At various times, Reverend Lutz had been asked to resign, but in each instance he had positively refused to do so. Some members of St. John's were also desiring an English-speaking pastor. Pastor Conrad Prottengeyer was called to Dubuque as a second pastor and was to have charge of the English services and religious instruction. He arrived in Dubuque in May 1906, but his presence was not enough to ease the discontent of some members. After 34 years of service, the congregation of St. John's voted at their spring 1907 meeting to remove Reverend Lutz as the pastor of the congregation. It was the beginning of a nasty struggle. The members of the congregation drew up formal charges and presented them to the synod officers and the church council, who accepted them as well-founded. After a lengthy investigation by the Iowa Synod and the president of the Northern District, Reverend Lutz was formally asked to resign, not because the charges against him were worthy of dismissal, but for the sake of peace within the congregation, because in their opinion, Pastor Lutz had lost the confidence of a large part of the congregation. Reverend Lutz was given 4 weeks to comply and find a call in another congregation. Refusal to comply would mean he will be suspended from the church and prevented from acting in the ministerial capacity of the Lutheran Church. But the struggle continued for nearly a year. Pastor Lutz refused to vacate the pulpit or hand over church property. Pastor Lutz also claimed that the majority of the people of the congregation had not voted for his resignation, while others insisted that the meeting had been conducted according to the Constitution and was perfectly valid. With few other options, the whole matter was taken to civil court. The congregation as plaintiff asked for an injunction to restrain Reverend Lutz, the defendant. The court sided with the congregation and issued a temporary injunction preventing Pastor Lutz from holding worship at St. John's. By this time, he had also been suspended by the synod, pending a full investigation. But Pastor Lutz continued to hold services at a chapel on the corner of Jackson and 22nd Streets. Rumor was that steps would now be taken for his excommunication from the church. Reverend Lutz went to court, asking for the injunction to be lifted. After the attorneys finished their arguments, the Honorable Robert Bonson urged the congregation and Reverend Lutz to seek resolution on their own.
This affair should be settled out of court. It is not to the taste of the church-going people to have such a case as this in court. I do not know that it can be settled out of court, but it should be. I am frank to say that there is an intensity of feeling in this case, some for Reverend Lutz and others against him.
In September 1907, Judge Bonson ruled against Reverend Lutz, refusing to remove the temporary writ of injunction that would have allowed him back into the pulpit at St. John's. In February 1908, Lutz gave up the fight.
For the sake of peace and harmony, there has been enough of fighting.
In the final ruling on the matter in November 1908, Judge Bonson decreed that the congregation of St. John's has a right to dismiss Lutz, and did so in a proper manner. He also held Lutz responsible for costs of litigation. His ruling read,
The temporary restraining order entered herein on June 13, 1907 is hereby made permanent, and it is ordered defendant Henry Lutz is hereby permanently enjoined from exercising any of the powers and faculties of pastor in and upon the said premises of said congregation.
In the end, when Pastor Lutz left St. John's, there was also an exodus of 157 members who departed with him. They left without malice, determined to have their own church. There were 107 charter members. On June 9, 1907, the St. Matthew German Evangelical Lutheran Church was formed in a Methodist church building at 25th and Jackson Streets. The following week, June 16th, the very first services were held. With the aid of friends, they purchased the lot at the corner of 18th and White Streets at a cost of $3,800. As the new year of 1908 dawned, contracts were let for the construction of a new church. The congregation itself was incorporated on March 2nd, 1908, as a lot was purchased for the church. By September, the basement was already being constructed. The early members of St. Matthew were asked to make commitments to the new church by making pledges for their contributions. The document reads, "The undersigned bind themselves to pay the following subscriptions within 6 months toward the erection of St. Matthew's Lutheran Church." The members of the church subscribed $7,000, and during 1908 the sum of $5,000 was paid in. Everything was moving forward. Pastor Lutz was officially called as pastor of St. Matthew in 1909, and the cornerstone was laid on March 21st, 1909. These are the only known photos of the laying of the cornerstone.
This is a picture of William and Ida Nank on their 50th wedding anniversary. Grandpa helped build St. Matthew's Church, and some of his brothers also helped to think that they could start from nothing and end up with such a beautiful church. I think Grandpa would be real proud to think that we can still say, you know, we are William's heirs at St. Matthew's. And I think that would make him very, very proud.
In June, Harold Grassley was the first child baptized, in the church basement, of course. A baptismal font was donated by his parents as a gift to the church. The Weekly Times Journal of Dubuque, July 8th, 1909.
At 10 o'clock on the morning of July 11th will occur the crowning event in the great effort which has been made during the past year by the followers of Reverend Henry Lutz to build a church wherein they might bring their children up in those doctrines which they believe to be the true exemplification of the Lutheran faith. On the morning in question will occur the dedication of St. Matthew's Lutheran Church at the corner of 18th and White Streets, and come as a fitting climax to one of the great church wars which has ever been waged in this city. It is altogether fitting and proper that the new church should be dedicated to the service of the Christ at this particular time, for it was just about 2 years ago Reverend Lutz and his followers, those faithful men and women who loved him and had adhered to him through the entire contest, were left without a church, without property, and without funds.
Our friends throughout the city very generously assisted us in the hour of our trials and gave us financial assistance when it was most needed. We owe a great deal of gratitude to them, and we feel that we can never fully show our appreciation of the interest in our church and the practical aid at the time when it was most needed.
Music has always been a big part of the life at St. Matthew, even in the earliest days. Pauline Lutz was the first organist, receiving a salary of $25 for the entire year. She also served as the church's first choir director. The initial reed organ used by the congregation was donated by Father Renier. The first church group, the Ladies' Aid, was organized on August 18, 1907, with 62 members in its first year. By fall, the Ladies' Aid was organizing its first picnic social. Another early program of the church was the start of confirmation classes.
We were confirmed in German, imagine.
Oh, really?
We had to teach our folks the English, and they taught us German. But it was really interesting to have the German, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Just like when I go in church now, there's a I could tell you the windows in the church, because I didn't go to church to watch what people were wearing, if they had a new hat on or something. No, I didn't know that. So I always, that picture that was near the pulpit, you know, it shows Jesus. He's there and has a little child on his lap,
Mm-hmm.
and one standing. And he looks down to him, and he said in German, "Lasset die Kindlein zu mir kommen und wehret ihnen nicht, denn solcher ist das Reich Gottes." And I'd always say that in my mind. And then in English it is, "Let the little children come unto me, and don't harm them, for they are in the kingdom of God."
When I moved to Dubuque in 1956, I went to every church in Dubuque, but I ended up in St. Matthew's because I liked it the best. I liked the people. They were really friendly with me, especially the older ones. Some are gone now, But I never will forget Georgia Beck and people like that.
The sanctuary was completed in 1910, followed by the painting of the church and the purchasing of a pulpit on June 19th of that year. The sanctuary dedication took place on September 25th, with much cause for celebration. Lucille Burt was the first child baptized in the sanctuary, and the first marriage was that of Minnie Rudolph and Adam Nank, the parents of Melita McDonough. Ruth Whelan remembers Pastor Lutz and the early days of St. Matthew.
Reverend Lutz, his daughter, Pauline, married my brother. When their first child was born, she died. So that picture above the altar is in memory of Reverend Lutz's daughter.
What do you remember about Reverend Lutz? Do you remember him?
Oh yeah, I was pretty young.
You were one of the first people baptized?
Yeah, I guess so. My father's name is in the cornerstone of the church. So they were members a long, long time. I was confirmed by Reverend Deers.
Anything else that you can remember?
We had Luther League, and we would meet once a month. And then we would play games. Yeah. And then we had a lunch.
Pastor Lutz even gave a picture to her parents as a gift. The signature on the back is now nearly faded away. The early years of St. Matthew passed. A fee of $1 was established for wedding and funeral services played by the church organist, who was now Miss Hedwig Katz. In 1913, a contract was signed for a Moeller patent tubular pneumatic action pipe organ. In April, the organ was installed and dedicated at a cost of $2,000. Half of the expenses came from a gift by Andrew Carnegie. A bell was purchased 2 years later by the Ladies' Aid for $287. The inscription read, "Presented to St. Matthew's Lutheran Church, Dubuque, Iowa. Reverend Henry Lutz, pastor, by the Ladies' Aid Society, A.D. 1915. It was said that Mr. Frank Buten hauled the bell from the depot without pay, and Mr. Haber took charge of the pulling of the bell into the tower, also without pay. St. Matthew always seemed to be a forward-looking congregation, a church that valued its young people. In 1917, the young people of the church were allowed to have a picnic as long as they covered the expenses. With Sunday school enrollment nearly 200, these were busy days for St. Matthew. Yearly Sunday school parades were held with magnificent floats, many constructed by Oscar Thompson. They would be a tradition until the 1930s, when they were eliminated for monetary reasons. In 1918, Pastor Herman Deers became the assistant pastor at St. Matthew for a salary of $1,200 per year. Pastor Deers' daughter, Dorothy Deers Phillips, recalls those early days.
He had finished his seminary graduation and his internship, which was at the law school in Missouri, because he wanted to know the laws of his new country so he could help his parishioners. And they needed a German-speaking pastor, of course. German was the main language then. And so he was hired at $1 a day. He was the assistant pastor. Then he was called to be the first pastor, and then he could afford to get married. He had met his future wife when her brothers, who were all pastors, they were at a seminary. They brought him home, and so he met Mom, Elfriede Langhaus, And he said, that's the girl I'm going to marry. But she was only 15 then. But finally they did get married. They lived at Aunt Dina's. Now, Aunt Dina is Christine Lutz, the daughter of Reverend Lutz, around the corner on West 15th Street, up on our hill. And then the congregation bought 1555 Montrose Terrace, my home, for all the time that I lived in Dubuque. And it was really too expensive for St. Matthew's to get into debt for. It might have been Aunt Dina's illusions of grandeur that they had to have a house on the hill. During the Depression, when people were so very poor, sometimes people would come to our front door and would say, Pastor, we have no food. And he would come into the dining table or kitchen and gather up what we had and give it to them.
Churches, like families, share sorrows as well as mutual joys. In the early years of St. Matthew, sickness and illness were noted in the St. Matthew's record.
St. Matthew's record, July 1919. Mr. Grutzmacher of 3036 Kohler Avenue has been suffering of late. Mr. Grutzmacher intended to enjoy the taste of a melon, but strangely to say, his stomach was so badly affected that he has been unable to move around for a week. St. Matthew's record, September 1921. Mr. Fred Hacker also spent a week in Finley Hospital after an operation for rupture. He says he had no pains at all. Don't be afraid to undergo an operation if you suffer from painful rupture. St. Matthew's record, August 1922. To the many inquiries concerning the health of Mrs. Eberl, we beg to say that at times when she can rest at night, her nerves quiet down. We firmly believe that although troubles of the nervous system are not cured in a day, that she is continually improving.
Pastor Lutz celebrated his 50th anniversary of ordination in 1919. That same year, the altar was dedicated as a tribute to Pastor Lutz. A huge blow came on September 5, 1922, when Pastor Henry Lutz died. Pastor Deers assumed the duties of full-time pastor. In 1923, the Ladies' Aid Society donated the Jesus and the Children glass window. The Haeflin family also donated a church window around that same time. It serves as a reminder to the congregation today that many church members have a long and rich history with St. Matthew.
St. Matthew is a very special place to me. Generations of my family have gone here. I believe the fourth, and Lillian would be the fifth. A great grandfather, founding member, and it has always been an incredible place, and it has only gotten better.
In the summer of 1925, Pastor Deers returned to Germany to visit his mother and brother. He had not seen them for nearly 20 years. The congregation supported his decision to make the trip. As the mid-1920s dawned, change was in the air. The New Year's Eve service of 1925 was the first service conducted in the English language. The strong leadership of the Ladies' Aid was about to be joined by the men of the church. The Brotherhood was formed November 30th, 1926, another long-running church group. Time had passed quickly, and in 1927, St. Matthew celebrated its 20th anniversary. Church membership at the time was estimated around 500. This was also a time of progress in other areas. At the 1928 annual meeting, it was approved that men and women could come together to the altar for Holy Communion. As the Great Depression brought anxiety, St. Matthew tried to stay positive with social outings such as church picnics. By 1930, a new card system was adopted for announcing attendance at communion. That same year, the organ was overhauled and repaired. Pastor Deers departed St. Matthew in 1937 for First Lutheran Church in Waterloo. St. Matthew called Reverend Harold Dowgs as its third pastor. German services were also on the decrease, reduced now to once per month. There was much activity with the youth of the church. A junior choir formed in 1938. The Junior Mission Band was established at this time to promote mission interest in the children of the church.
But what I remember about my early life here at St. Matthew was we had about 5 or 6 guys or 7 guys that kind of hung around together, and we used to put ropes around these 4 posts and have boxing matches. We had a basketball hoop over here that we used to play basketball with all the time. The ceiling was higher then, because we put a drop ceiling in here now,
As an early memory, it's where I met my husband, and of course where I met him was in the room right over there.
Oh, I remember going to confirmation classes down here. In order to get in, we either had to go up to the drugstore and get a key, or being I was just a little guy, I'd crawl down through the coal chute. First ones here always had to start the fire, And we had the chairs all lined up here, and we have choir practice here. And then the Sunday morning, the little kids had their Sunday school right in here. This is only 57 years worth.
57 years. Unbelievable. And you owe it all to St. Matthew.
That's right. That's right.
A milestone was reached in 1939 when all mortgage on the property was paid in full. A mortgage burning was held on July 1st, accompanied by much celebration. As World War II erupted in 1941, the final German service was conducted at St. Matthew. It was certainly not a coincidence. Special services were held to honor and pray for the soldiers. In 1944, Ruth Anderson was selected as the new organist of St. Matthew. Ruth was the sister of Pastor Dowgs. Little did anyone know that Ruth would serve in that role for many decades, bringing her special talent to countless worship services. Year after year, despite the changes that would come, Ruth Anderson was a constant, always dependable, and always amazing in her talent. In the 1940s, minstrel shows were common. For historical purposes, we note these events.
It would be connected with bazaars. There were many booths on either side of the aisle down to the stage, and they were all homemade things like rugs and fudge and other kind of candies and foods or handcrafts. And on the stage would be the minstrel show, which, as I said before, would probably be considered dreadful, but it was lots of fun.
On August 10th, 1947, Pastor Dowgs asked to be released from St. Matthew in order to accept a call in Walla Walla, Washington. Dr. A.A. Yagnow served as interim pastor prior to the arrival of Reverend John Moore, who was called from Britt, Iowa, to become the next pastor of St. Matthew. By now, St. Matthew was gearing up for its 40th anniversary. The 12-year-old Christ window was purchased by the Sunday School in honor of longtime Sunday School Superintendent Adolph Stotz, who completed 28 years of service. These church ads from the 1940s show that St. Matthew was reaching out to the city in an attempt to bring in new members. The Martin Luther Home for the Aged, later Luther Manor, was established in 1948 with much support and leadership from the St. Matthew congregation. Pastor Moore served as the first chairman on the Home's board of directors. Church attendance at St. Matthew averaged 312 per Sunday. Notice the exit door on the right side of the sanctuary in this 1948 photo from the wedding of Ralph and Ruth Klum. As the 1950s dawned, a church sound system was installed by the Brotherhood, and church sports leagues were emphasized to a great degree. Softball, bowling, darts. Church fellowship was stronger than ever before. And another change in leadership occurred. Pastor Moore left St. Matthew for a call in Sumner, Iowa. By April of 1953, Pastor Herman Senft was called from the military chaplaincy in Korea to St. Matthew. A new parsonage was purchased at 164 Nevada Street, and on August 30th, Pastor Senft was installed at St. Matthew. The early 50s were years of growth for St. Matthew, as these church attendance record books indicate. And when the last of the old German choir music was sent to a Canadian congregation, part of the past was buried. Sunday school classes required the church basement to be partitioned, and the cradle roll was established, marking the birth of church members' babies. Pearl Hunemiller would assume duties of a cradle roll, something she proudly maintained for decades. In June 1957, St. Matthew marked its golden anniversary with special services each Sunday of the month. Guest speakers included Pastor Deers and Pastor Moore, and a special booklet was published with the motto, "To look back, to look up, and to look forward," a phrase that would be reused 50 years later for the Centennial event. In 1958, the church name was officially changed to St. Matthew Lutheran Church. Pastor Senft started up the Couples Club, later named Pairs and Spares. The fellowship and good times were many. For example, mother-daughter banquets were held celebrating the bond of family at St. Matthew. Pastor Senft was released in 1961 to accept a call to Atonement Lutheran Church in New Brighton, Minnesota. On November 20th, Reverend Lester Larson was installed as pastor of St. Matthew. That same year, the monthly newsletter The Voice was started, later named The Lamplighter, before reverting back to The Voice.
I was the first secretary of St. Matthew's Lutheran Church. Always the pastors did it themselves, the bulletins and that. So I was hired to be secretary of the church, and I was here at the day when President Kennedy was assassinated. I was working that day. I was also the first woman member of the council. So I have a couple firsts anyhow here.
In March, a down payment was authorized on the property to the south of the church for further expansion. Elmer Klum's notes reveal the exact date when plans began for the educational wing of St. Matthew.
Meeting called Monday, April 8th, 1963. Committee met with pastor and department heads to determine the necessary information relative to the type of building and space needed for educational unit. Looking into the future about 10 years, figuring the present growth in Sunday school, they asked for a building to accommodate 250 children.
A building planning committee was established in 1963 for a new educational unit, and a board of parish education was set up in 1964 to oversee both Sunday school and Vacation Bible School. Confirmation was altered so that the program covered grades 7, 8, and 9 over 3 years instead of 2. 1966 was a big year for the new educational wing. In February, the apartment buildings south of the church were demolished to make room for the new building. On March 2nd, bids were let for the structure after a loan of $125,000 was obtained from Dubuque Bank and Trust. And finally, on March 20th, groundbreaking took place for the new educational wing. Ernie Moreski was on hand to film much of the construction. The new educational wing was dedicated with an open house on April 2nd, 1967. It was a monumental day for St. Matthew Church, an accomplishment that was arguably the biggest since the sanctuary's construction nearly 60 years earlier.
Congratulations! Another generation is now enjoying new facilities and buildings, and we of the past are rejoicing with you. We regret very much that we cannot be with you today. Reverend and Mrs. H.H. Deers.
Not long after the new building was opened, Pastor Larson departed St. Matthew on May 28th for a parish in Elkhorn, Iowa. The Reverend Robert Wiederanders came in to serve as interim pastor until the September 3rd arrival of Pastor Robert Auden as the new pastor of St. Matthew. One of Pastor Auden's first duties was to help oversee the 60th anniversary celebration of St. Matthew Church in November 1967.
I looked at St. Matthew at that time, 60 years. And whenever you come to those milestones, you begin to look back a little bit and kind of reflect on the things that have happened, that have been significant for the congregation. Some of the hurdles that they've had to overcome, some of the challenges that they've failed to meet, and also the challenges they've met. It's kind of in one way it's a humbling thing, but in another way it's kind of an exhilarating thing to realize that, in the church we're always building on somebody else that's gone ahead of us,
Here is seldom seen footage filmed by Ernie Moreski during that time period.
We wanted to do the best we could to retain our youth. We did so with, I suppose, mixed results. Somebody said, you win some, you lose some. Well, we suffered from the loss of some of the kids, kind of drifted away from the church and drifted away from the programs that we had. But by the same token, we managed to hold on to a few of them, and that I think was one of the probably the most important things we had to do at that time. I saw that as an important ministry. Thankfully, for me, I had a lot of support from the congregation in the efforts we made with our youth.
The church's very first pictorial directory was released in celebration of the anniversary. At the time, Pastor Auden noted that the growth pattern in Dubuque was not favorable to downtown churches.
Several things prompted my thinking. One is, in the area of new membership, as an example. I used to make calls on people who were new in the community and so on. It was very hard to convince a person that they should drive by Holy Trinity and drive by St. Peter to come to St. Matthew. And so as I began to reflect on this, I began to reflect that we need to find a way to serve the aging community downtown. My idea was that we've got to develop some programs that are going to make St. Matthew distinct to what St. Matthew's place is in the community and in the church.
By the mid-1970s, the Food and Friendship Group was established as part of Project Concern, first led at St. Matthew by Darlene Rolfe.
They were trying to get the neighborhood together so that they could get to know each other, so they would know their neighbors. So we started inviting people that lived within a 2-block radius. Over the years, the older people have moved out of this area and our numbers were dwindling, so we decided to add our own members to come to the meal. So we have maybe 40 people from our own church that now attend. We are also the only church that still does this program, so that's kind of an honor.
The strength of the program was another reason for the church kitchen to be upgraded. The kitchen went through extensive remodeling with updated wiring to accommodate air conditioning.
Good donuts. We always have donuts every after each service.
What did you pick out today?
I love glazed donuts. They are my favorite.
That same year, nearly 30 Luther Leaguers attended the youth gathering in New Orleans. The 1970s were drawn to a close. Renovations continued through 1979 to the cost of $84,000. Plexiglass was installed to the outside of the stained glass windows for insulation as well as protection. Additional landscaping was done to add beauty to the outside of the church building. And St. Matthew was poised to celebrate yet another milestone, 75 years, the Diamond Jubilee.
Probably the most difficult part of the renovation was in the area of the pews. And I guess Pastor Lutz was instrumental in getting the pews. And Pastor Lutz was, especially among the older people, was one step away from sainthood in their eyes. And of course, what Pastor Lutz had done was to be done forever. And I'm not saying this in any disparaging way. I'm just saying that this was the fact. And we still had a number of people who said, oh, those pews, you know, they're the most beautiful and comfortable pews that you could ever hope to have. The pews were becoming quite broken. People complained sometimes that the pews would pinch when they'd sit down and so on. We sold the pews to somebody in Batavia, Illinois, and he had specific instructions when he bought the pews. He said, now when I come in, he says, I don't want any of your members of your church there. Because he said, I'm going to saw those pews. And he said, I've had an experience with this before. He said, some member will come in there and just about tear me apart because I'm cutting them. But he said, we cut them because then we rebuild them for another church. But he said, we have to cut them in order to, because they're too long for us to handle. Well, anyway, that was so in comes the chainsaw.
By November 1978, a center aisle was visible for the first time. Mr. and Mrs. Fred Hershey donated a quadribel carillon to the church.
to begin with, he said, I want to make it a surprise. One day we got these huge boxes into the church, you know. Well, where was I going to put these boxes? See? So I put them in one of the Sunday school rooms. It wasn't used very often for too many things, thinking, well, you know, not too many people are going to bump into this thing. Well, lo and behold, of course, somebody saw them. So somebody comes up and says, what are those boxes doing in there? I said, well, they're kind of they're a surprise. They're going to be, I can't tell you. Well, of course, I couldn't tell them because Fred had been giving me strict instructions that wanted to be a surprise on Christmas Eve. Some people were surprised. Well, a lot of people were surprised. But by the time we got them in, the surprise had kind of been lost. It was a semi-surprise by the time Christmas came.
Church member Ray Sanger donated a memorable gift to St. Matthew around this time, a beautiful nativity set that would become a tradition each and every year thereafter. Dan Avenarius served as choir director during this time. On February 1st, 1980, St. Matthew lost its longtime volunteer and mother hen to countless youth. Nellavine Allman died at age 58.
I don't know just how to describe her other than to say that she was a hard shell with a soft heart. That sometimes is important. I think the discipline in our Sunday school was good because she was willing to be a disciplinarian.
Nellavine always said, this year I will double your wages, and she really didn't give us that either.
Sometimes you realize as you grow up that some of the people that were the most disciplined to you are the people that did you the most good.
1982 would be the final year for Pastor Auden, who departed St. Matthew after many years.
Looking back at my ministry at St. Matthew, I look back with both satisfaction on many things that I'm sure we can look back on and being satisfied that we did what we could. And of course, a certain amount of disappointment because we always feel that we could have done more. We could have done better. We could have done things perhaps differently in a way that would have been even more effective. But I think we have to leave that kind of thing to God.
Wartburg student Fritz Lampe served St. Matthew as interim pastor.
One of the things that made St. Matthew so important for both myself and Diane is the very thing that brought us to Dubuque, Iowa. I'm a product of the Pacific Northwest, a suburban congregation, and really didn't have a history in a congregation that had multiple generations that went back 50, 60, 70 years. And so coming to Wartburg Seminary, part of it was let's see what Midwestern Lutherans are about and see what the church is about outside of the coast. And then to begin to work at St. Matthew and to find a community of people where you had maybe 3, sometimes 4 generations of people active in all kinds of ways in the congregation was important. Did the youth ministry, worked with the confirmation, got a chance to teach that, and we did a clown workshop, I think, too, where we got some of the youth painted up, and we led a communion service. St. Matthew was very supportive, and as we prepared to go to Papua New Guinea, people donated money to help with the cost. That experience that St. Matthew helped support, getting me into global mission or getting Diane and I overseas, clearly changed our lives.
The St. Matthew congregation includes several direct descendants from Martin Luther, such as the Avenarius family.
He felt so strong in what he believed in that he was willing to stand up for what he said, even though the risk of his personal consequences or life or the love of his church, whatever, could have suffered from that. And so I guess that's probably one of the things that I took from him the most, and I think I'd probably already had that character of standing up for what you believe instilled in me to begin with, but probably after having read that as a late teenager, early 20s, probably even impressed upon me more that it is important for you to stand up for what you believe. The opinion that you have may not always be the most popular opinion, but it may be the right opinion. And if you don't stick up for it, who else is going to stick up for it? And so I think probably knowing that that's a trait that I have from a 14th generation great grandfather is pretty humbling.
His dad, Jake Cockburger, touched us on the back when we were sitting in a pew. He said, "Okay guys, it's about time you get out of that pew and get out here and start doing what we're doing, because we're getting pretty old to do this." And we did. Don and I got out, and we was there until Don passed away, and I'm still here yet. I guess I'll die here too, like the rest of us. But it means a lot to me. That's why I call this my church.
The links to the very earliest days of the church were beginning to fade. As St. Matthew began to lose its longtime members, the church also looked to its future. Student assistant David Dowgs brought his leadership to the Luther League, taking the young people to the youth gathering in San Antonio, and in 1983, Pastor Gerald Melby was called to St. Matthew. In October 1983, longtime St. Matthew members Eldon and Barb Lipstock were seriously injured in a car accident, but it would also become an opportunity for the congregation to turn tragedy into hope.
It was a Friday night, and Friday night was Mom and Dad's date night, and Friday night was a hockey game, which we always went to, and my younger brother Peter had a cold, and my mom and dad didn't want him to go to the hockey game that night. So I stayed home with them so they could have their date night. Pam and Sue went down. We dropped them off. We went right up past the accident. At the time, didn't even recognize the car. We went home. About 2 hours later, we got a call from the hospital. I had to go down, saw my mom right away in the emergency, and Dad was already up in ICU.
He was basically in a coma, diabetic coma.
Yeah, 112 days in a coma. He came out of that, and they tried him in rehab, and he was there 2 days short of a year. And then he went to Lutheran Manor Nursing Home. And Mom was in there until 2 weeks before Easter, so she was in there quite a while too. The night we went home afterwards, I didn't know what to do. My first stop was at Pastor Melby's house. He was the most down-to-earth guy, and he was so easy to talk to. He made it look like there was a positive going to come out of it.
Right. It started with Gigi Hofberger. She came and stayed with us kids.
It was a very new beginning. It was like we had no clue about bills or anything, and they just kept showing up. And I remember I was my mom's legs. She'd get the bills, I'd take them up to have her sign checks. I was like, "Mom, we got 5 bills today." She'd sign 5 checks. Take them back home, I'd fill out the bills, and we did that. And it was one time we had a real lengthy conversation. I was like, "Mom, there's no money left." And then all of a sudden some checks started coming from the congregation at St. Matthew's.
Basically, from what I can remember, Ernie and I got together and decided that we should get a fund started to try to help out financially with anything that might be necessary. It was something that you didn't have to make an appeal for. We didn't have to ask for anything. It just came.
That was a real burden off of all of our shoulders. It was tough, but I mean, we had lots of help. Somebody was always bringing something over to eat. You make sure you kids eat, you know. Everybody pulled together.
The church was like a second family to us.
The Rolfs and the Moreskis, Hillarys, and they all just kind of took us under their wing.
Here's a Christmas card that Mom had given to St. Matthew's. It was a year after the accident, and it reads, "To all our friends at St. Matthew's. Thank you all for the love, prayers, and support you've shown us. We truly appreciate you all so much. Eldon is trying to wave hi. We wish each one of you a very Merry Christmas and a blessed New Year. The Eldon Lipstock family." No matter how many years have gone by, I'm just really thankful. Couldn't have probably made it through if it wasn't for everybody, Mom, Dad's friends, and the church people. I still consider it my church. It'll always be our church.
By 1985, long-term intensive Bible study was back as Pastor Melby brought the Bethel program back to St. Matthew. In 1986, the church organ underwent an extensive cleaning and repair job. church member Dick Conan worked for many years as church custodian. During this time, fellowship events were prevalent as good times were had by all. No talent shows? Softball games? Chili cook-offs? The social interaction was strong and morale was high. In the church office, the phones were answered by Irene Kokowski. This was a time of energy and enthusiasm for St. Matthew Lutheran Church. However, Pastor Melby left St. Matthew in 1990.
I didn't have any goals but to be the pastor and love the people and share, life honestly and openly. And I guess my farewell sums it. I hope people will always, faith, hope, and love. If we have that, why, they can have drug wars, revolutions, and the church can go topsy-turvy, but, nothing else changes. That holds it.
Reverend Edwin Schick served as the interim pastor.
I came to Wartburg Seminary with parish ministry in mind. Instead, my pulpit has been the classroom lectern, except for very limited times. So what I like especially now is that my lectern has become the pulpit.
That same year, Pastor Richard Thompson was called as pastor of St. Matthew. One area of focus for Pastor Thompson was a renewed emphasis on adult education and retreats. One special gift of Pastor Thompson was his ability to remember names. Chances were, once he met you, he would remember your name.
I've liked the openness here. I've liked the concern that people have for one another. And also the sense of being part of something that's larger than just what's happening here in our particular place, but a sense of concern for the community and outreach beyond St. Matthew's doors. Well, I see my purpose as being in a servant leadership role, and through serving people to also lead the congregation in the direction that we think together God wants us to go.
As the temperature rose outside in 1991, churchgoers stayed cool as air conditioning was installed in the sanctuary. The youth program at St. Matthew also experienced change in leadership in 1989 when Jeff Dyer took over the Luther League. Through his 12 years as youth director and beyond, Jeff also wrote and directed dozens of Christmas plays for the church.
One of the themes that kind of comes up again and again is bringing the past to modern day, and that's something that I think I've done a lot in the various plays that I've written, is try to connect these Bible stories that are very ancient to what's happening in our lives today. Especially for the kids in Sunday school and the Luther League, it can sometimes be very daunting for them to try to find a connection. And also I think the use of humor is something that can be used effectively, and sometimes when you put humor into a church play, it kind of opens some doors and people let down their guard a little bit. I think it helps the message of the story to be conveyed a little bit easier.
I have to let them kill me. That's why I'm here, so that I can die for you.
Die? For me? Why me?
Because I love you.
I did not see the light. I was lost in the deep dark night. You were right. You were right.
The Luther League attended the National Youth Gathering in Dallas in 1991, where Pastor Thompson met Pastor Melby. This rare photo is perhaps the only known picture where two St. Matthew pastors appear side by side. In the following years, the League attended youth gatherings in Atlanta, New Orleans, and St. Louis. Back at home, St. Matthew was becoming active in a new endeavor, downtown Dubuque Christian Outreach. Annual summer block parties were organized as St. Matthew joined with neighboring congregations to entertain and to serve the downtown residents. In a wonderful connection to the past, the great-great-granddaughter of Pastor Henry Lutz visited St. Matthew. Barbara Bomer later took the time to write to the church.
Dear Reverend Thompson, I am the great-great-granddaughter of Reverend Lutz. This summer, our family had a chance to visit Dubuque, including St. Matthew Church. We enjoyed visiting the church, sitting in a pew where Grandpa may have sat, and meditating where our relative once pastored.
In September 1997, St. Matthew marked its 90th anniversary with a special service, historical displays, and a reception in the Fellowship Hall. Pastor Thompson left St. Matthew in 1999 and accepted a call in Colorado.
God's blessings in the future. I'll continue to keep this congregation warmly in my prayers. Thanks.
For a while, Nick Striegel served as St. Matthew's interim student pastor, assisted by his wife Leslie. Nick was a veterinarian who had become allergic to animals. After some soul searching, he went to the seminary. St. Matthew was blessed to have them during our transition between pastors. As a new millennium dawned, longtime Sunday school teacher Pearl Hunamiller retired after a half-decade of teaching generations of St. Matthew children.
Some of the kids responded more than others. And some were problems, but I just gave them an icy stare.
And it worked, I bet.
And it worked. Now it's that I can help people.
I'm very proud of her, and I can't say enough nice things about my mother because I feel very fortunate to have her for a mother.
I enjoyed every year of it. I was here 45 years, but I enjoyed every year of it.
Lucille Bemis would also step down after decades of Sunday school instruction. In the summer of 2000, St. Matthew welcomed Victor St. George as its new pastor. As Pastor St. George began his tenure at St. Matthew, he also brought several new ideas, including a revamped confirmation program and new worship liturgies.
I want to tell you, when I was 40 years old, I was comfortable. I was happy in my life. I was doing some stuff that I enjoyed doing, spending time with people I loved spending it with. 40 hours a week. When I went home, I didn't have to worry about nothing at work. At 40 is when I went to seminary. I didn't want to.
In addition, a Saturday evening worship service was soon introduced. The informal service, focused more on word and silent meditation, proved to be popular with a number of churchgoers. In the summer of 2000, the church nursery was repainted with murals of Bible stories. Other staff changes occurred at this time. Kathy Miller assumed duties in the church office. Fred Ollinger and later Dale Kleinschrodt took over the youth program. Sue Schwartz and Sheila Pillard have shared their talents for years in the area of parish education, overseeing Sunday school. And Ruth Anderson celebrated 50 years as organist. Following her death, St. Matthew was blessed with other talented musicians, including Ernie Schmidt and Joanne Wright. A resurgence in music brought many new faces to the St. Matthew Church Choir. A generous gift from late church member Flora Bell Strews made it possible for St. Matthew to install an elevator. In addition, Pastor St. George helped establish lay communion distribution. A group of dedicated members bring the aptly named Holy Meals on Wheels to those who cannot attend worship services due to illness or age. And with more and more homebound church members, St. Matthew began to videotape the weekly worship service. This outreach program was pioneered by Scott Cartman and later Dave Tice, who worked diligently each Sunday to record the services and prepare the tapes for local cable TV. In the summer of 2006, a group of St. Matthew volunteers showed just how green their thumbs were by helping to cultivate a memorial garden project along the side of the building and at the ends of the parking lot. As the year 2007 approached, St. Matthew Church planned and prepared for a year-long celebration marking the 100th anniversary of the church. One of the first steps was to refurbish the church building itself.
And it became apparent that we needed a new roof. And we were downstairs. I went and got a basket, joking about fishes and loaves. Well, in one of the greatest stories ever at St. Matthew, people came up with $6,941 in about 20 minutes. And I'm talking about money, not promises. After our roof was completed, we handled the task of redecorating inside and repainting. We had quite a few cracks and a huge section of plaster missing from the rear of the sanctuary, probably about a foot in diameter. But they fixed the cracks and repainted, but they also enhanced the windows by putting this border around it that kind of makes them jump out at you, even magnifies the beauty that we had before.
St. Matthew Lutheran Church launched its Centennial Celebration with a float in the Memorial Day 2007 parade. With a theme of look back, look forward, look up, St. Matthew began a year of reflection and reaffirmation of its purpose and its future.
But I look at St. Matthew and I see a future that could be very bright. And you know, when people mix together with God, and great things can be accomplished. And I think that St. Matthew has that opportunity. It's always been kind of a sense of that the church stands the best in the times of crises. I believe that St. Matthew has a future. Maybe not the future that we thought of 40 years ago, or maybe not the future that was envisioned the day that St. Matthew was organized, but I think it has a future.
May God bless us and keep us. May God's face shine on us and be gracious. May God look on us with favor and give us peace. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.
What's significant about a centennial is that it gives the congregation a chance to recall, to remember the past. And in the Bible, whenever the people of God at any one point remember the past, there's a temptation to want to retreat into the past, to the better times. But the more fundamental way of understanding the past is to remember what God has been about, how God has been faithful in the midst of the community, in all of its messiness and all of its messy history. So that gives us a chance to do that and remember all the lives that have become, in some sense, interrelated, sometimes very intimately interwoven in this situation.
100 years, with so much change, yet so much to be proud of, so much to celebrate. St. Matthew Lutheran Church was born in controversy, a risk taken by a few that would prove to benefit many. Over 10 decades, the church has managed to survive. Through it all, the church has been a family of faith.
So as we remember the past, we look forward to the future, and I think this could be a great opportunity to think carefully about what it means to be God's people in this time and place. This place that we call St. Matthew Lutheran Church is an important place, but it's only important because the people of God gather here. The New Testament word for church means an assembly, a called out community.
As St. Matthew Lutheran Church marks 100 years of worshiping God, we look back and fondly remember the people and events that shaped our ministry today. As our second century dawns, this is the perfect time to look back, look forward, look up.